'68 Plymouth Fury I police car. We'll take a look, open it up, check out the fender tag, and look at the parts car. So here is the 1968 Plymouth Fury I two-door post police car. 67 and 68s were real similar. They did change the grills. They did put in the little federally mandated side marker lights, which these are round. So that's an easy visual cue to determine between 67 and 68. The car has its original almond white paint underneath the brown lacquer that's been sprayed on. And a car like this, you just don't know what the history of it was. I know two-door police cars were available, and back in the day, before now, 50 years ago, you still did see them out on the beats. But the next decade after this, in the 70s, was pretty much the end of the two-door police car. So something like this really is unique, and this is kind of the last breath of when that was available. Really good car overall. Do have a bit of rust forming in the lower quarters, which for a Mopar car, this is actually considered really pretty good. And it's a pretty gentle curve, so that's a panel that wouldn't be terribly hard to form a replacement part for. You can see the ghosting of maybe some lettering that's sanded off the door, and then maybe a light or a siren up top or antenna or something that's been filled. So all of those on an original car like this are cues that do help say, yeah, it was a police car. The hood's in pretty rough shape. It's got some dings all over it and just marks that are going to be hard to get out on a big flatter expanse like that, and then this little rust hole. But I do have a parts car, and we'll take a look at that in just a bit. It's also a 383, and I feel like between the two of them, they're really a good match to take two and build one. So we'll take a look around this two-door post and open it up and show you some details on it. So you can see this thing's pretty basic under the hood. You've got your power brakes, air conditioning. This is the 383. Unfortunately, stripped down. There's some parts here and some parts not. I know the AC compressor's with it in the trunk. I was actually able to buy on the auction the correct 68 date-coded starter and the correct 68 date-coded alternator. Obviously seized. They sit open like that, and there's enough moisture in the air here in Kansas that that's just the way it's going to be. So all you've really got to do at this point is just take them apart and start the rebuild process, see what you got, go from there, see what's usable, see what's not. I am not a Mopar expert. I like these cars. I know some people here on the channel have kind of criticized not showing more of them, but for whatever reason, in my area and the places that I run across these cars, there just aren't a huge amount of them around. We did grow up in Mopars. We had old Plymouth Valiants and a '66 Fury, which is really one of my great loves. My dad's always had a little of everything, but we've always kind of been a bit of a Mopar family. So here's the interior of the car. You can see pretty typical sun-baked condition. That's always going to be a trade-off on any of these vehicles that have been stored outside. It's just the reality. Not every car gets put away and kept nice. They get sunburned on the outside, on the inside. They get rust from underneath, and they get critter damage. And that's just part of what restoration is. You're deciding if the car is rare enough, unique enough, something that you want to bring back. And this one, to me personally, I definitely feel like it's worth it. I did ask you guys on the last video, which was the auction video, what, if anybody, knew about the production numbers of these cars. And someone had said, yeah, estimated 2,000 of these two-door posts and about 10,000 of the four-door cars. So to me, that's something I consider rare. I've always used the Chevy Nomads 55, 6, and 7 as kind of a rule of thumb. They made an average of 15,000 of those a year, and they're considered rare. So anything to me under 15, I personally consider a rare car. I know anything to do with this collector market, the R word is incredibly tossed around and abused, and that's why I really don't like to get too crazy over it myself. But in some instances, you do run across something where it legitimately does apply. And I think this car is one of those cases. On that auction, there were several that I think you could put in the rare category, and this was the one that I picked. Now, with a little bit of critter damage, I mean, it's not awful, but it is gonna have to be taken apart and cleaned up anyway for the restoration, so that's not really the end of the world. And the one bad thing that I think probably will suffer would be the build sheet, which is actually on a Chrysler Corporation car called the broadcast sheet. And those broadcast sheets are basically the assembly line sequence ticket that show the guys which parts to pull off the racks and install on the car for the way it's built. Of course, one of these police cars is going to have specified equipment, their heavier duty suspension, heavier duty springs, steering shocks, all of that sort of thing. Certified speedometer if it was equipped with one. This one does not, so that leads me to think that this is the standard model car. They had a Pursuit that was intended for patrolling, and that one probably is what the four-door on the auction was. Had that certified speedometer. It also had a rubber floor. This two-door has a carpeted floor. So all of those little details would be called out on the build sheet if you have it. They did put them under the back seats and also under the gas tanks, and occasionally they can survive, and in a lot of cases, especially if somebody lives on a dirt road, you get that mud that tracks up on top of the gas tank. And something like this that's well over half a century old, paper is designed to show the assembly line guys how to build the car. They didn't have any idea that people would be using these half a century later in the restorations of these cars to document them, and so there was no real effort made at preserving them. So I did get with this car a few original parts. All of the original wheel rims are with it, and this is a specific rim. It's a 15-inch and I believe 6 inches wide. It's got the 2 safety beads, and it's got the bubble for the optional factory disc brakes. From the front, it looks a lot like a 56 DeSoto or Chrysler wheel, and pretty easy to confuse with one of those. But you can see that metal's thicker, and then knowing these safety ridges and the disc brake bubble, that is a wheel that is a bit tough to find. And obviously those hubcap clips were a vestigial tail, and they're designed to hold on these hubcaps, which are also a bit of a vestigial tail. This is an assembly line off-the-shelf part from the 50s parts bin that they updated the molds a little and just did a smooth center, took away that Plymouth sailing ship. These caps I did not get with the car. I did buy them on eBay and was lucky to find them because they're just not that common of a piece. Now, in the factory sales catalog, they picture them with the standard assembly line dog dish hubcap, and that's what the regular models did use on the passenger cars. That's kind of a common thing on the sales catalogs, is that they will picture them a certain way, and then there's other running changes that they make when the cars do go into production. But knowing that these are the correct wheels for the car, you can see the original almond paint underneath, and then that brown lacquer that they put over. I do know those are the correct wheels for the car, and I was aware of these hubcaps. Thought I had some on the shelf, but no. So ordered these off of eBay, and all of that little stuff that's police car only, you just have to search and hunt for and find off of a police car if you don't have it. Fortunately, I got the bumper jack. I believe this is the correct Carter AVS carburetor. Haven't checked the numbers on it, but it was here with the car. Again, there's this 68 date coded starter. These are very, very hard to find where that's still readable. Almost all of these starters, that was just a very faint foundry casting mark, and they go to the rebuilder one time, they take them apart, they dump them in the media blast cabinet. The nose, which is cast iron, or just ductile iron, I'm not sure which, but that survives the blast cabinet because it's iron, and that aluminum is so soft that it just gets worn away. Same deal on these alternators. This one, the date is the 40th week of 67. You can see the 6 was stamped too faintly to show up, but 1 week through the 52nd week was the production sequence, and then they would sit approximately 2 to 6 months until they were installed on a car. So 40th week of 67 would put it right in the range for 68 and make it the correct part for this car. There is this later model 70s. You see that huge thing. Not correct, it was in the car, but I left it in here to shoot the video just to show that police cars did have higher amperage alternators just to run the extra stuff, the lights, the radios, whatever, the siren. Very, very solid trunk floor. Hard to find a Mopar with a good solid trunk floor, and these are unit body cars. So if you end up having to patch that, it is quite a bit of a chore. Can be done if the car's worth it, but if they're very rusty, you've really got to decide if you're going to want to put the work in. Fortunately, this car is in very good shape, so just on to mainly rust repair in the quarters. Trunk lid does have a tiny little hole in it, but it's the born with factory assembly line lid for the car, and I would rather fix a little patch like that than to go spend money for a replacement lid and then have to fit it to the car and gap it, because you can see the gaps all the way are really good on this lid. Passenger taillight lens had a crack in it, and so I was able to find on the auction a replacement that you saw sitting there in the front seat. Bumper chrome is decent. Overall, any one of these cars, they're all going to need some form of work to bring them back, and a car like this, I really feel like is just so straight and complete and preserved that it's not going to be any easier than the average restoration, especially considering that it's a police car, but definitely will be well worth bringing back. Got the fender tags, which are still on the car. These are actually riveted on a lot of your B-body and E-body cars. I see them Phillips screwed on. So I'm not exactly sure what all these numbers mean, but this is the process of discovery. I do know on sale day that the guy that bid against me on this car, his interest in it was because it had the sure grip rear end, and he was able by these numbers to find that on there and identify the call out. So that'll be the next section of this video. There are two fender tags. The one on the left has the primary information. The one on the right is a special order tag. To decode these, we start from the bottom left. PE21 is a Fury two-door post. Engine, Super Commando 383 4-barrel V8. Transmission, 3-speed automatic. While the tires are listed as 14-inch blue sidewall, I don't think this is right, considering that the car does have its original assembly line 15-inch wheels. So this could just be some incorrect information in the decoder. The question of the tires is a fascinating discussion in itself. Stick around, we'll touch on that in a bit. The car was built June 7 of 1968, almost 55 years to the day before I picked it up. Exterior paint is listed as beige. You'll note each line of the Chrysler Corporation vehicles had their own name for the shade, but it was all the same color. Since the upper door frames of these cars were steel and had to be painted, there was a call out for that paint color on these fender tags. Other options are pretty scarce, just AM radio and air conditioning. The U designation means that this was a sold car, meaning someone had ordered it, and it wasn't just a regular dealer stock car that would have been put into inventory. The rear axle code is 48, which denotes a 323 locking rear end. Manufacturers have different names for locking rear ends. Chrysler Corporation called theirs the Sure Grip. What about those tires? Well, the blue sidewall is almost certainly designation for Goodyear Speedway Blue Streaks. These had been first issued on the 1966 and 1967 Plymouth Barracuda Formula S in a 14-inch size. 15s had been offered in 1963 through 1967 Chevy Corvettes. So, if a person were wanting to restore the Fury to as close to assembly line correct look as possible, these Corvette tires would actually be the closest you could get. Now they are a bit pricey at close to $600 each, and make note of this one. This will probably be the only time you'll ever hear of a Corvette part being the most authentic to restore a Plymouth. Decoding these fender tags is never an exact science, so if I left anything out, or if you have any clarifications, comment below and fill us in. So this is the 68 Fury I 4-door hardtop. This one's just in a little too rough a condition to bring back. Quarters are rusty, rockers are rusty, and this is just one of those that you could put money into it, but what are you really going to have when you're done? Yeah, it's a hardtop, but just another old 4-door car. And having the pack rats inside, that makes it just a big cleanup project, and pretty much expect to replace all the wiring harness and all the upholstery. And by that time, against what a decent survivor sells for, what do you really have left when it's done? So this one, realistically a parts car, but the good thing about it is it's a 383 V8 and it's all complete. So that would be all the pieces from under the hood to put the two-door back together. Now, unfortunately, this engine was seized when I got it, and that's been 7-8 years ago. So I have had it soaking, and hopefully that'll get it to come apart. I know a lot of guys on YouTube do stuck while it runs, but to me, you're just kind of asking for trouble. Yeah, you might get the thing freed, but what damage is done to the cylinders for pitting or scratching of the rings? And to me, it's easy enough to pull heads off and take the pistons out and the rods and just look at it, send a ball hone over it. A lot of times those rings are going to be stuck, and it's just better to put a fresh set of rings in there. If you need to do the bearings, just clean it up. And that's kind of where this one's at. But I would say either of these, assuming that two-door is numbers matching and that the core, everything of the block is still good, that would be the one to do the basic short block, long block, rotating assembly, and just rob pieces off this 4-door, all the external belt drive, exhaust, and everything that's missing to put that one back together. The other awesome thing to say about the 4-door is that it does have a very good hood, so that'll be just better to start over with a straight panel than to try and fix the rust and dents that are in the hood from the 2-door car. Another nice thing you could say about having a parts car like this is that when you have your primary project vehicle torn apart, something like this can really be a good reference for how things go back together, for all your little fasteners and clips. And if you have bolts that break during disassembly or that won't clean up, I know some of these restoration guys for the B-body and E-body cars, they'll actually take a whole C-body car, Newport, New Yorker, Fury, Monaco, Polara, whatever, and they will actually strip them apart just to get the nuts and bolts to restore a muscle car basket case. So something like this, obviously, when you take your primary project car apart, you can never take too many pictures, you can never document, you can never bag and tag and label enough, but going back together, it just always is a really good thing to have a second vehicle that is together intact, just to be able to take a look at and have a point of reference for how things go back together. So you can see this car was sold at Jim Clark dealership in Topeka, Kansas. I would assume that was when it was new, but some used car dealers did put stickers on as well.